Hi, welcome to the channel. If you've ever looked at your ad account and thought we're running so many creatives, why isn't this scaling? This video is the exact answer that you need. Now, in this video today, I'm going to break down a concept that I call Insight Diversification and why it's replaced creative volume as the primary driver of paid social performance for the operators and the brands that I work with. Now, by the end of this video, you're going to have a clear framework for how you can audit your current creative strategy, identify if you're actually stuck in creative diversification thinking, and shift to an insight-first approach. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, insight diversification, this for me is the best creative strategy that we currently have available to us for brand scaling in 2026. And it's the actual approach that I'm using with all of my clients. So, let's work through. So, what I see in most ad accounts that I audit with clients is I see a multitude of ads. So typical campaign structure, one campaign, multiple ad sets, multiple ads. Now, that's fine. There's probably another video that I can create around correct structures, but what we're talking about specifically today is essentially the creative thinking behind this. Now, there's a lot of drivers at the moment in the industry to push out as much volume as possible. A lot of that has changed since the Andromeda update, so there's lots of insights around the fact that the more creatives that you have, the better the account performs, and to a large extent that is true. However, what I'm going to discuss and go through today just gives a bit of a context and understanding as to why there's a different way of thinking as well. So why most e-commerce accounts test hundreds of creatives but almost new insights. So typically when I look into an ad account for a client, when we first take over, I see a multitude of ads. And they'll have different styles, different formats, different hooks. Some will be UGC, some will be founder-led, some will be product-specific, some will be studio shot. It's a multitude of different things going on. But one of the most important things that I see is that most of those ads actually generate the exact same message. So the industry currently has a bit of an obsession around volume. So more creatives equals more scale, more variance, more testing, more ads, better performance. And the industry assumption I've illustrated here in this chart indicates that the more volume of creatives that you have running, the better your expected performance. Now, whilst this might be true for some accounts, actually that isn't true for everyone. And what we tend to see is where the same message is being repeated, the same psychological triggers are being repeated, and the same customer motivation, but just a different mode of execution, we enter what we see in what we call a creative fatigue zone. Now, what this typically means is you're running a number of creatives that are essentially saying the same thing, albeit they might have a different UGC creator. They might have for static images, they might be a different color background, they might be a different product font, there might be a multitude of different things going on, but strictly speaking, the message is exactly the same. So what happens is the ad hits a creative fatigue zone. Now, how do you get out of that creative fatigue zone? Well, what creative diversification actually tests is things like hook styles, visual styles, backgrounds, and formats. So you've got your difference between UGC and static. You've got your difference between whether it's a product-led angle or a founder-led angle. You've got your differences between hook styles and whether they're question hooks, statement hooks, or a multitude of others. And then from a background perspective, we see lots more lifestyle creatives being pushed out at the moment. And we also see the same sort of studio type content that's generated typically by clothing brands. But none of that actually tests or identifies new customer insights. So the question that most brands never ever test, is this underlying message even correct? So we focus intently on things like the hook type, creative styles, backgrounds, visual formats, but we never quite hit the trigger on customer insights. And I want to go into a bit of detail around what that actually looks like and how you can implement that for your brand. So create this visual that just gives you a bit of a context around what we're talking about when we separate creative diversification and insight diversification. So creative diversification actually generates from one specific insight. Okay, so you've got one specific insight, and then what brands typically do and agencies do on behalf of brands is they generate a multitude of creatives for that one insight. Now, this is obviously a lot easier to do now due to AI and other kind of means, but essentially all they're doing in that space is they're creating different hooks, different visuals, different formats, but ultimately they are landing the exact same message. Now, what I'm doing with my clients at the moment and seeing some unbelievable results for is insight diversification. So what this typically looks at is we take 5 insights from the customer. Now, these could be pain points, problems. One of the best methods actually we use to generate insights is to visit things like Reddit forums, customer reviews, competitor reviews, whatever that might look like, to really understand the modes and the methods for why customers actually convert and buy the products. And once you've done that and you've generated those level of insight, we're just working on number 5 here. Once you've generated 5 insights, you've then built out the capability to build 5 creative clusters. Now, what I mean by that is those creative clusters give you an example where you can hit different parts of the customer journey, or you can actually hit different customer segments based on the creatives. Now, in terms of doing this, if you take those 5 insights, 5 creative clusters, and you create 10 ads per creative cluster, you'll end up with 50 creatives. Now, each of those creative segments, so these creative clusters here, will speak to different motivators, different problems, different beliefs, and ultimately land specific key messaging and new messaging for these customers. Now, I've got another slide that brings this to life a little bit more to be able to show you what that looks like. So, why is insight diversification important? Well, fundamentally, when you generate more insights and more creative clusters, those additional creatives that you build out ultimately attack multiple pain points. And essentially, by addressing multiple pain points, you're actually broadening that reach into the market. So if you visualize this right now, you might have a really good understanding of your customer segments and your actual customer base. But if your messaging is consistently the same and it doesn't change and it doesn't have any variation, but your ads you think look different, you're still speaking to that same segment. So if you imagine 5 groups of people on a field, okay? Now, one group of people are to the left of the field. They're the people that you're speaking to consistently all the time. No matter what ads you run, no matter what you generate, they're always speaking to that one particular segment of customers, which is fine. So you've captivated an audience, you've got buying customers, you're generating revenue for your business. Brilliant. That's exactly what we want to do. However, by doing that with one single point of message and one set of creatives, what you're actually doing is you're ignoring and not touching the other 4 segments of audience. So those multiple pain points that you need to get through insight diversification enable you to do that. So rather than speaking to one specific segment of audience, you're then in a position where you can speak to multiple. And what that means is you're broadening that reach, you're broadening your audience, and you're then in a space where you can attract, nurture, and convert a multitude of customers instead of the same customer segment over and over again. So, how does this work in practice? Well, generating the 5 levels of insights, as I said earlier in the video, one of the key points I look at is customer pain points. Now, customer pain points are not hidden. They're not some mythical thing that you can't capture. There's a multitude of ways you can do this. Customer forums, testimonial reviews. You can actually look at competitor reviews as well, negative and positive, and start to pick out what specifically we're seeing with those customers that's generating a level of insight that we can create and we can harness more messaging angles. Now, I'll just come into this in a bit more detail. So, one of the points that I look at when I'm doing this for clients is I like to kind of think back around what is it that we can do to actually build out a framework that allows us to do insight research. So let's make this really practical. Now, this is the insight research process that I run before a single brief is actually written for our creative team. And what step 1 involves is mining the language. You don't need to invent it. So your customers are already telling you exactly how to sell to them. You just need to listen. Now, where are you going to look? 1-star and 5-star reviews on product and competitors. Reddit threads and Facebook groups where your customers are actually hanging out and communicating about the product. Look at your customer support tickets. Look at your emails that you're receiving from customers with faults about the product, or questions about the products, or any post-purchase survey responses that you're actually capturing at the moment. Very few brands do this, by the way, but if you're able to do post-purchase surveys, the wealth of information that gives you is unfathomable. So you're not looking for themes specifically. What you're actually looking for here is you're looking for specific language. Now, if you look just for themes, the themes will generally stay quite close together. They'll either be a product-based theme, they might be a quality-based theme, they might be a cost-based theme. You can't really do an awful lot with that. But if you're looking for specific language, phrases, metaphors, the exact words someone used to describe their frustration. So for example, when a customer might write something to you such as, I was so sick of feeling like I was going through the motions, that's not data, that's a headline, okay? So that would be specific for like a supplement brand. They're sick of feeling like they're just going through the motions, they're not really kind of motivated, they're not really got that level of energy. Now, once you've got that information and you've categorized that kind of motivator type, one of the things you need to look at in your bank of raw language that you've created is you need to organize it by functional motivators. So what outcome did this customer specifically want? The emotional motivators, how do they want to feel? The social motivators, how do they want to be perceived? And then the avoidance motivators, what specifically are they trying to escape? Now, each category represents a fundamentally different insight angle and a fundamentally different creative direction. And then that brings us on to step 3. So this is where you can identify the unexplored angles. So coming back to the point that I spoke about earlier on today, if you looked at your customers at the moment, there's 5 groups of individuals that you can potentially target for your brand, 5 sets of customers. You're currently only speaking to that one specific customer set. And the reason you're doing that is because you've hit an angle that speaks specifically to them. But what you've not done is identify the other 4 angles to speak to everybody on that pitch. So you're essentially speaking to a fifth of your potential customer base that you could have. And when you think about that in a bit more detail, if you look at and think about the revenue level that you're at for your business, if you're not at your targets or you're struggling to actually become more profitable or be more profitable, one of the fundamental reasons is not that you're not running enough creatives or enough ads, or you don't have your conversion rate optimized, or you don't have your email system set up. There's other videos that I'm going to do on those points, but specifically on the creative side, it's not that you're not running enough volume, it's that the volume that you're running specifically isn't speaking to all of those audiences. And that's exactly what the Insight Diversification gives us. So coming on to step 3, what we're going to do here is we're going to identify the unexplored angles. So you're going to look at the current creatives. Which motivator types are you speaking to? Which are you ignoring? Now, most brands default to functional and positive emotional. So they show the outcome, they show happy customers, great, that's fine. Now, the untapped territory is typically the avoidance, social identity, and the negative emotional angle. So these are like the before states, not the afters. Once you start to tap into each of those angles, you're attacking customers from multiple angles. I hate to use the word attack, but we'll go with it. And that allows you to really broaden out that reach to across the whole customer segment base, which is exactly what we want. And then step 4, fairly simple. You're going to assign one insight per creative concept. So this is the discipline part. Each creative concept, not each variant, each concept should be testing a distinct insight. You can then produce multiple variants of each concept, but the insight anchor stays relatively consistent. So this means your results essentially are going to be telling you something meaningful. This angle resonated or this angle didn't, not just this button color worked or this background color worked or this font worked. You're getting into a little bit more detail and you're being more specific around what you actually want to see within your ad account. So coming back to the presentation, so that's essentially how this works. Once you've identified those 5 insights, whatever they might be, functional, motivating, emotional, whatever that angle might be, you've then got your new messaging angles. Now, this is why you should implement this insight diversification. So coming back to the point I said earlier about having multitude of kind of customer segments, what you're probably finding at the moment is you're speaking specifically to this kind of light blue segment, but the purple, orange, red, and darker blue are being completely ignored, simply because the creatives you're producing, the messaging you're using, does not speak to their pain points. And because it doesn't speak to their pain points, they're not resonating with your adverts, they're not resonating with your brand, they're not becoming a customer. Now, by implementing Insight Diversification, you're identifying multiple customer segments to attract, nurture, and convert, and effectively broadening out that customer base, which is just one of the main things that we want to be doing for brands. So I hope you found this video useful. I've been thinking about doing this video for quite a while. There's lots of different discussions around creative volume, creative strategy, creative diversification, but nobody's really speaking about this at the moment. And I think it's really, really important. It's an angle that I've looked at for quite a while, but I think it's becoming even more prevalent now. The reason I think it's becoming more prevalent is because a lot of creative output is being automated now with the utilization of AI. So therefore it's easier for people to create volume of creatives, but essentially what they're doing is they're lacking that thinking process and that thinking time to ensure that those creatives are the right creatives to put out. So hope you enjoyed this video. Going to be doing more of these videos now, a bit more detail, a bit more kind of conceptual thinking, strategies, what's working, what's not. Hopefully you find it useful. If you do, subscribe. Would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you run an e-commerce brand and you are struggling to actually scale profitably and predictably, you can visit our website, book a call. There's a call link in the description in my bio. And if you want us to help with you scale your brand, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation. Have a great day.